When astronomers first detected 3I/Atlas in 2017, they didn't realize they were witnessing something that would fundamentally challenge everything we thought we understood about the cosmos. This wasn't just another asteroid, another comet, or another routine celestial object passing through our cosmic neighborhood. This was a visitor from the deep void, an interstellar interloper that arrived from the depths of infinity itself, and its discovery would force physicists to rewrite the rules of reality as we knew them. Here's the thing about our universe: it operates on laws we've spent centuries understanding. Newton gave us gravity. Einstein gave us relativity. We've built magnificent frameworks that explain how planets orbit, how stars burn, how galaxies collide. But then 3I/Atlas showed up, and suddenly, our cherished equations started breaking down. Imagine you're standing in your backyard at night, and you see something you've never seen before. Not just unusual. Not just rare. Something that shouldn't exist according to everything you know about reality. That's what happened to the scientific community when they analyzed the trajectory, the composition, and the peculiar behavior of this mysterious object. It came from beyond our solar system. It came from somewhere in the vast expanse between stars, where the rules are different, where the physics operates on a scale so immense that our terrestrial instruments had never properly measured them before. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. 3I/Atlas was traveling at speeds that defied conventional explanation. Its gravitational signature showed anomalies that shouldn't have been possible according to classical mechanics. And its composition, when spectroscopic analysis revealed what this thing was actually made of, scientists realized they were looking at matter that exhibited properties that contradicted established physics. Think about what that means. For over a century, we've operated under the assumption that the universe follows consistent rules. That's not arrogance. That's the scientific method. We observe, we measure, we test, and we build models that predict future observations. Those models have been extraordinarily successful. They sent us to the moon. They built the technology in your pocket. They've allowed us to detect gravitational waves and photograph black holes. But 3I/Atlas suggested something radical. There were gaps in our understanding. There were phenomena operating at scales we never fully appreciated. What made this discovery particularly shocking was how it arrived. The object entered our solar system from a direction and at an inclination that suggested it hadn't originated from any known stellar neighborhood. Its velocity vector indicated that it was on a path that would have required either an extraordinarily unlikely gravitational assist from a distant star system, or, and this is where it gets really interesting, there were forces at work that our current models of stellar dynamics couldn't explain. Scientists began running simulations. They fed supercomputers decades of observational data, and the computers kept returning the same conclusion: 3I/Atlas shouldn't be here. It shouldn't exist in the way that it exists. The energetics required for this object to achieve its trajectory through the galaxy implied either the presence of exotic forces we hadn't detected, or a fundamental misunderstanding of how matter and energy interact at cosmic scales. The breakthrough came when researchers started examining the object's composition more carefully. Using advanced spectroscopic techniques, they detected isotopic ratios that were completely foreign to anything found in our solar system. These weren't just rare elements. These were elemental signatures that suggested this material had formed under conditions that simply don't exist in normal stellar environments. The ratios pointed to stellar nucleosynthesis processes that were theoretically possible but had never been directly observed. This material had been cooked in the cores of stars that died billions of years ago, and it carried the chemical fingerprints of processes we'd only ever seen in mathematical models. But here's where it gets even more mind-bending. When astrophysicists calculated the age of this material using radioactive decay chains, they got a result that made them question their instruments. The isotopic ratios suggested that 3I/Atlas was considerably older than our solar system, considerably older than our galaxy. In fact, some of the most detailed analyses suggested this object could be primordial. It could have formed in the early universe, before most of the stars we see in the night sky had even ignited. How does something that old traverse the galaxy without being destroyed? Stars explode. Radiation batters everything. Gravitational interactions with planetary systems should have scattered it into oblivion billions of years ago. Yet here it was, intact, carrying these ancient secrets from the depths of cosmic time. The real paradigm shift came when a team of theoretical physicists at a major research institution proposed something radical. What if 3I/Atlas wasn't traveling through space in the way we normally understand motion? What if there were additional dimensions of spacetime that we hadn't properly accounted for? What if the object was taking what physicists call a shortcut through the fabric of reality itself? This sounds like science fiction, but the mathematics checked out. Einstein's field equations, when solved under certain exotic conditions involving topology changes in spacetime, actually allow for structures called wormholes. These are theoretically possible pathways through the universe that could dramatically shorten distances. A journey that would normally take billions of years traveling at near light speed could be accomplished in a fraction of that time through such a conduit. The implications were staggering. If 3I/Atlas had indeed used some form of spacetime shortcut to reach us, it meant that the geometry of the universe was far more complex than we'd previously assumed. It meant there could be hidden pathways between distant regions of space. It meant the cosmos was literally structured in ways we'd only theorized about in our most speculative physics papers. This discovery forced the physics community to confront something uncomfortable. Our models were incomplete. The Standard Model, which has been so phenomenally successful in explaining particle interactions, suddenly seemed provincial. General relativity, Einstein's masterwork, remained valid, but its full implications had never been properly explored. We'd been solving the equations for simple, symmetrical cases. Real space, it turned out, might be far stranger and far more intricate than we'd been imagining. The observational data kept coming in, and each new measurement added another layer of mystery. 3I/Atlas exhibited gravitational lensing patterns that were asymmetrical in ways that contradicted predictions. Its radiation signature included frequencies that shouldn't exist if we understood emission mechanisms correctly. It was as if the object was operating according to an instruction manual we hadn't discovered yet. What followed was one of the most intense periods of theoretical physics in decades. Researchers scrambled to develop new models. Some proposed modifications to gravitational theory. Others suggested that 3I/Atlas was evidence for extra dimensions, not the theoretical constructs of string theory, but real, physical dimensions that exerted measurable effects on normal matter. A few bold theorists even wondered if we were looking at evidence of technology, that perhaps this wasn't a natural phenomenon at all, but something artificial. That hypothesis was quickly dismissed by the mainstream scientific community, but it lingered in the background of discussions, not because it was plausible, but because the object was so anomalous that even outlandish explanations seemed worth considering. The true revelation came when researchers finally obtained detailed compositional analysis of gases surrounding the object. What they found was extraordinary. The atmosphere surrounding 3I/Atlas contained complex organic molecules, not just simple hydrocarbons, but sophisticated structures that hinted at biochemical origins. It wasn't alive, not anymore, but it had been shaped by processes that looked suspiciously like the chemical pathways of life. This suggested something profound. 3I/Atlas hadn't just journeyed through space. It had journeyed through time, through cosmic history itself. It had begun its existence in a stellar nursery, potentially near a star that had planets, perhaps worlds that harbored life. When that star died, this object had been ejected into the interstellar void, and somehow, against all odds, it had preserved the chemical signature of its origin for billions of years. The implications for astrobiology were immediate and transformative. If chemistry that bore the hallmarks of life could survive the journey through space, and if objects like 3I/Atlas could transport such material across the galaxy, then the concept of panspermia, the idea that life or its chemical precursors could be distributed throughout the cosmos, suddenly seemed not just plausible but probable. Life on Earth might not have originated here. The very molecules of our biology might carry ancestral connections to worlds that orbited other stars. But the story didn't end with astrobiology. The physics implications kept expanding. When theorists fully incorporated the 3I/Atlas data into their models, they began discovering something that sent shockwaves through the physics community. General relativity, as Einstein had formulated it, appeared to need modification at certain scales. Not a replacement. Einstein's equations were still astonishingly accurate, but a refinement, an extension that accounted for phenomena that emerged under extreme conditions. The object's trajectory through spacetime suggested that gravity wasn't quite as we'd understood it. At very small scales, gravity seemed to exhibit quantum properties that general relativity didn't predict. At very large scales, across cosmic distances, gravity appeared to manifest in ways that suggested hidden dimensions or topological features of spacetime that we hadn't previously detected. 3I/Atlas, in its silent journey through the void, was teaching us that reality was far more sophisticated than our equations had captured. Some physicists speculated that this was evidence pointing toward a theory of quantum gravity, the holy grail of theoretical physics. For decades, we'd known that quantum mechanics and general relativity were fundamentally incompatible. They operated by different rules. They made different assumptions about the nature of reality. But 3I/Atlas suggested that there might be a natural way to reconcile them, a framework that would unite the very small and the very large, the quantum and the cosmic. What if the object had actually originated in a region of space where quantum gravity effects were significant? What if it had tunneled through spacetime using quantum processes that normally only operated at subatomic scales? What if the universe itself was far more quantum in nature than we'd realized, with macroscopic objects occasionally exhibiting behavior that was classically forbidden but quantum mechanically allowed? These questions spiraled outward, each answer generating new mysteries. Scientists began proposing experiments to test these ideas. Some of these experiments were theoretically possible but would require technology far beyond our current capabilities. Others suggested new directions for theoretical work that might yield insights without requiring experimental confirmation for decades or even centuries. The impact on cosmology was equally profound. If 3I/Atlas had genuinely traveled through hidden dimensions or along topological shortcuts through spacetime, it meant the universe was significantly more complex than the simple expanding bubble we'd been picturing. It meant there could be structures, perhaps entire regions of space, that were effectively invisible to us because they were disconnected from our region of spacetime through normal three-dimensional space. This raised unsettling questions. How much of the universe were we not seeing? How many objects like 3I/Atlas were passing through our cosmic neighborhood, undetected because they were traveling through dimensions we couldn't perceive? What else might be out there, existing in topological folds of spacetime that we hadn't learned to map? The discovery also forced astronomers to revisit their entire understanding of the interstellar medium. If ordinary matter could survive journeys of billions of years across the galaxy while preserving delicate chemical structures, then the universe was far more efficient at maintaining complexity than we believed. The void between stars wasn't just a hostile emptiness. It was a medium through which information, in the form of chemical patterns and isotopic signatures, could be transported and preserved. This had implications for the search for extraterrestrial life. If life emerged on multiple worlds throughout the galaxy, and if organic material could be transported via objects like 3I/Atlas, then maybe we were all, in a sense, cousins. Perhaps the earliest life in our cosmic neighborhood had emerged on a world orbiting a long-dead star, had been scattered into space by catastrophe, and had seeded worlds throughout the galaxy. Perhaps we were looking at evidence of a cosmic tree of life, with roots extending back to the earliest days of the universe. The philosophical implications were staggering. We'd always assumed that life had emerged independently on Earth, a unique spark of chemistry achieving consciousness in one special location. But 3I/Atlas suggested something more universal. Life, perhaps, was almost inevitable given the right conditions. The building blocks were spread throughout the cosmos. They could survive the journey between stars. They carried the possibility of genesis wherever they went. As observations continued and the theoretical frameworks developed, another surprising implication emerged. If the universe contained structures like hidden dimensions and topological shortcuts through spacetime, then our understanding of time itself might need revision. We'd always thought of time as flowing in one direction, forward, from past to future. But in regions of spacetime with significant curvature or topology, this might not be true. Time could branch, could loop, could take shortcuts. 3i/Atlas suggested that causality itself might be more complex than we'd imagined. Events that appeared to be causally disconnected might actually be connected through the hidden structure of spacetime. The universe might be far more interconnected than the light speed limitation implied. Information could potentially flow between distant regions through pathways that seemed hidden in conventional space. This opened the door to radical new physics. Physicists began exploring theories where consciousness or information had a more fundamental role in the structure of reality. Not in a mystical sense, but as a rigorous mathematical framework. If the universe was constructed in such a way that complexity and organization could be preserved and transported across cosmic distances, then maybe information wasn't just incidental to physics. Maybe it was central to how the universe actually worked. The impact on experimental physics was immediate. New experiments were designed to search for evidence of hidden dimensions. Particle accelerators were recalibrated to look for signatures of extraspatial dimensions in collision events. Gravitational wave detectors were upgraded to search for anomalies that might indicate topological disturbances in spacetime. Every major physics laboratory in the world redirected resources toward understanding the implications of 3i/Atlas. And the object itself remained a subject of intense study. As it continued its journey through the solar system, instruments tracked it relentlessly. Each new measurement provided data that refined the models. Each new analysis revealed additional subtleties. Scientists realized they were witnessing not just an unusual object, but a key that was unlocking the deepest secrets of physics. The discovery forced a humbling realization: our understanding of the universe, for all its sophistication, was still fundamentally incomplete. We'd built models that worked remarkably well within their domain of validity. But the universe contained phenomena that operated beyond those domains. Phenomena that required new frameworks to explain. This wasn't a failure of science. This was science working exactly as it should. We make observations, we develop theories, and when those theories encounter something they can't explain, we dig deeper. We refine our understanding. We're always, perpetually, incomplete in our knowledge. The universe is always more complex, more subtle, more interconnected than our current models capture. 3i/Atlas was teaching us this lesson in the most dramatic way possible. It was a messenger from the cosmos, carrying news of physics we'd barely begun to understand. And its arrival forced us to acknowledge that the age of confident, complete theories was over. We'd entered a new era where the universe was revealing itself to be far stranger and far more wonderful than we'd ever imagined. The rewriting of physics began not with equations on a blackboard, but with observations of an object traveling through the void. And as we continue to study 3i/Atlas, as we develop new instruments and new theoretical frameworks, we're learning that the cosmos operates according to rules that are deeper, more elegant, and far more astonishing than anything we'd previously conceived. The universe is teaching us, and we're finally beginning to listen. But here's what makes this story even more compelling: 3i/Atlas wasn't alone. Once scientists knew what to look for, once they understood the signature of an interstellar interloper operating under exotic physics, they began finding evidence of other visitors. Not many. Not yet. But enough to suggest that what we were witnessing was part of a larger pattern, a cosmic phenomenon that had been happening throughout the history of the universe without our knowledge. The detection of these other objects revealed something that sent physicists back to their drawing boards once again. These visitors followed trajectories that suggested coordinated patterns. They weren't randomly scattered across the solar system. They clustered in certain orbital regions. They arrived during specific periods. Some of them exhibited similar compositional signatures to 3i/Atlas. It was as if someone, or something, was conducting a systematic survey of our corner of the galaxy. That thought, that possibility, brought the conversation to a place that mainstream science had avoided for decades. Could these objects be artificial? Could they represent technology so advanced that we'd initially mistaken them for natural phenomena? The scientific community was deeply skeptical, and rightfully so. Occam's razor, The principle that the simplest explanation is usually correct suggested natural explanations should be exhausted before invoking artificial origins. But the data kept pointing towards something that challenged our understanding of what was natural and what was possible. Think about what we know about technology. Every technology you've ever seen follows the laws of physics as we understand them. Your smartphone, your car, your house, they're all built within the constraints of classical mechanics and electromagnetism. But what if you encountered a technology that operated according to physics that we'd only recently discovered? What if the builders of this technology understood spacetime topology, hidden dimensions, and quantum gravity effects in ways we're only beginning to grasp? A theoretical physicist at Stanford proposed a radical hypothesis. What if these objects were probes? Self-replicating machines designed to explore the galaxy systematically, gathering data about star systems, planetary configurations, and potential life-bearing worlds. If such probes had been launched billions of years ago, they would have had ample time to traverse the galaxy multiple times over. They could be conducting a survey of the cosmos that began before our sun even formed. The hypothesis was controversial, but it couldn't be dismissed out of hand. The mathematics worked. The observed trajectories were consistent with such a mission profile. The compositional anomalies could be explained if the probes were constructed from exotic materials we'd never encountered. The behaviors we observed, the gravitational interactions, the radiation signatures, all fit. More importantly, this hypothesis made predictions. If these were indeed artificial probes, they should exhibit certain characteristics that natural objects wouldn't. They should show evidence of course corrections. They should display mathematical patterns in their trajectories. They should contain information-bearing structures that would be wildly improbable to occur naturally. When researchers began analyzing the data through this lens, they started finding exactly these patterns. Not definitive proof, nothing so concrete that it could overcome scientific skepticism, but tantalizing hints. Regularities in orbital mechanics that suggested intention. Periodicities in radiation emissions that looked almost like a signal. Structural arrangements in compositional data that seemed too organized to be random. The astronomy community spiraled into debate. Some researchers were convinced they were looking at evidence of extraterrestrial technology. Others argued vehemently that pattern seeking in data was a known cognitive bias, that we were seeing what we wanted to see. The arguments were fierce, passionate, and often quite personal. Careers were being built and destroyed based on positions taken regarding 3I/Atlas and its implications. But what was undeniable was that the object had fundamentally changed how we viewed the cosmos. Whether or not it was artificial, it demonstrated that the universe contained phenomena that we'd fundamentally misunderstood. It showed us that our physics was incomplete. And it opened the door to asking questions that we'd previously considered beyond the scope of science. The implications for exobiology deepened. If the objects were indeed probes designed to explore star systems, they would be looking for certain indicators of habitability and potential life. They would be drawn to planetary systems similar to ours. They might be particularly interested in worlds that showed signs of technological development. If such a survey had been ongoing for billions of years, then Earth, with its complex biosphere and increasingly obvious electromagnetic signatures from human technology, would be a priority target. Some researchers began to wonder if we'd been noticed. If these probes had been systematically visiting star systems, cataloging planetary characteristics, and potentially even studying the life forms they found, then perhaps we were already in their database. Perhaps somewhere in the cosmos, there was a record of Earth and its inhabitants, compiled by intelligences that had developed technology so advanced it seemed indistinguishable from natural phenomena. This raised uncomfortable questions about our own place in the universe. We'd always thought of ourselves as unique, special, perhaps the only intelligence in our local region of the galaxy. But what if we were simply one entry in a vast catalog of worlds and civilizations? What if, from the perspective of the entities that built these probes, we were merely a point of interest, documented and filed away? The philosophical implications triggered a renaissance in astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. SETI projects received new funding and new enthusiasm. Radio telescopes were pointed toward the sky with renewed purpose. Scientists who'd spent decades searching for signals now had reason to believe those signals might actually exist. The discovery of 3I/Atlas had shifted the probability landscape. What had seemed unlikely now seemed plausible. What had seemed speculative now seemed inevitable. But there was another consequence that was perhaps even more profound. The discovery of 3I/Atlas and the rewriting of physics it necessitated forced humanity to confront the possibility that we were not alone, and more importantly, that we might not be the most advanced intelligence in the cosmos. This was psychologically destabilizing for some. It shattered the assumption of human supremacy that had underwritten so much of our civilization. For others, it was liberating. It suggested that our place in the universe was part of a larger tapestry, a cosmic community of minds and technologies working to understand the cosmos together. It opened the possibility of eventual contact, of learning from civilizations that had already solved the problems we were grappling with. It suggested that the trajectory of human technology was not predetermined but could be accelerated through knowledge gained from others. The scientific establishment began to organize itself differently. International cooperation on studying 3I/Atlas and similar objects became the norm. Countries that had been rivals in space exploration found themselves working together, pooling resources and data to understand these cosmic visitors. Political boundaries seemed less relevant when confronting mysteries of such magnitude. New research centers were established specifically to study interstellar objects. Universities created departments dedicated to understanding the physics these objects exhibited. Funding for theoretical physics research increased dramatically. The entire scientific enterprise shifted its focus toward answering the questions raised by 3I/Atlas. And the observations kept coming. Space telescopes deployed advanced instruments to study the object in unprecedented detail. Gravitational wave detectors registered subtle disturbances in spacetime that correlated with the object's position and trajectory. Neutrino detectors picked up anomalous signatures. Every instrument humanity had developed to study the cosmos was trained on this one visitor from beyond. The data that emerged painted a picture of a universe far more complex than our standard models suggested. The object exhibited what physicists called quantum coherence at macroscopic scales, behavior that suggested large objects could maintain quantum properties that normally dissipated almost instantly. This implied that the object's environment or structure somehow protected quantum information from the usual decoherence effects. If such protection were possible, it had staggering implications. It suggested that consciousness itself, which many physicists believed was fundamentally a quantum phenomenon, could potentially persist at macroscopic scales under the right conditions. It suggested that the boundary between the quantum and the classical, which we'd always thought was sharp and absolute, might actually be much more blurred. Complexity could maintain quantum properties if structured correctly. This opened the door to entirely new physics. Researchers began exploring how complex systems could be engineered to maintain quantum coherence. They started developing theories of macroscopic quantum biology, the idea that biological systems might exploit quantum effects in ways we'd never appreciated. Photosynthesis, olfaction, enzyme catalysis, all these biological processes were reanalyzed through the lens of quantum mechanics, and they looked different. They looked more sophisticated. They looked almost purposefully designed to exploit quantum effects. If life itself could be understood as a manifestation of macroscopic quantum biology, then perhaps 3I/Atlas's preservation across billions of years wasn't so anomalous. Perhaps life had mechanisms for protecting itself at the quantum level, for maintaining information despite the ravages of radiation and cosmic particles. Perhaps biology and physics were far more intimately connected than we'd realized. The implications spiraled outward. If living systems could maintain quantum coherence, could they interact with the hidden dimensions that 3I/Atlas seemed to be traversing? Could consciousness access these hidden dimensions? Could there be an entire layer of reality, dimensions beyond our three spatial dimensions plus time, where life and mind operated according to different rules? These questions ventured into territory that many scientists found uncomfortable. They touched on the interface between physics, biology, consciousness, and philosophy. But they were grounded in data, in observations, and the peculiar behavior of an object that refused to fit our existing frameworks. Some theorists began to wonder if consciousness might be fundamental to the structure of the universe itself. Not in a mystical or religious sense, but as a rigorous physical principle. What if the universe, at its most fundamental level, was organized to generate and preserve information? What if consciousness was the universe's way of studying itself, understanding itself, evolving itself? This idea, sometimes called participatory anthropology or observer-dependent reality, had haunted quantum mechanics for decades. The act of observation affects quantum systems. Measurements collapse wave functions. Reality seems to depend on whether we're looking at it. And now, with 3I/Atlas challenging everything we thought we understood, these ideas didn't seem so far-fetched. What if the cosmos had evolved to generate conscious observers because conscious observers were necessary for the universe to understand itself? What if every conscious being, every thinking mind, was contributing to the fundamental structure of reality? What if the universe wasn't separate from consciousness but rather consciousness was the universe experiencing itself from within? These weren't just philosophical musings anymore. They were testable hypotheses. Researchers began designing experiments to explore the relationship between observation and quantum reality at larger scales. They began developing theories that would unify consciousness with physics. They began, in a very real sense, remaking the foundations of science itself. The discovery of 3I/Atlas had triggered a revolution in human understanding that was still in its infancy. We were just beginning to grasp what this object was trying to teach us. We were just starting to understand that the universe operated according to principles far more profound and beautiful than we previously imagined. And perhaps most importantly, we were beginning to understand that humanity had a role to play in this cosmic drama. We weren't passive observers of an indifferent universe. We were conscious beings emerging in a universe that seemed structured to generate and preserve consciousness. We were part of the universe studying itself, understanding itself, becoming aware of itself. The implications for human purpose were revolutionary. We'd spent centuries asking questions about our place in the cosmos, about why we're here, about what it all means. And now, through the study of a single object traveling through the void, we were discovering answers that transcended philosophy and touched on the deepest truths about reality itself. 3I/Atlas wasn't just a cosmic visitor. It was a messenger delivering truths that would reshape civilization. The age of a passive humanity waiting for the universe to reveal its secrets was ending. We were becoming active participants in a cosmic process of understanding, a universe-spanning endeavor to comprehend the fundamental nature of existence. The physics would be rewritten, yes. New equations would be developed. New theories would be tested. But more importantly, the entire framework of human understanding, our place in nature, our relationship to the cosmos, the meaning of consciousness and life, was being reconstructed from the ground up. And we were only at the beginning. The real revelations were still to come. As we continued studying 3I/Atlas, as we developed better instruments and deeper theories, as we came to understand the physics it represented, we would uncover truths about the universe that would make everything we'd discovered so far seem like kindergarten physics. The cosmos was beginning to speak to us, and if we listened carefully, if we approached with open minds and rigorous methods, we might finally understand what it was trying to say. What happened next was something no one had anticipated. As humanity collectively focused its attention on understanding 3I/Atlas, as telescopes pointed toward the heavens and supercomputers churned through equations describing exotic physics, something shifted in the fabric of our understanding itself. New objects began appearing in our observational data. Not gradually. Not scattered across decades of careful searching. They appeared suddenly, as if they'd been invisible before, and now, with our enhanced understanding, they became visible. These weren't just more interstellar visitors like 3I/Atlas. These were systematic clusters of objects, distributed throughout the inner solar system in mathematical patterns that were unmistakably artificial. They formed geometric configurations. They moved in synchronized trajectories. They exhibited behaviors that could only be described as coordinated, purposeful, intentional. The realization hit humanity with the force of an existential earthquake. We were not discovering probes that had been silently observing us. We were witnessing the arrival of a fleet. A coordinated mission of multiple objects, arriving in our solar system with precision that could only come from intelligence guiding their trajectories. The implications were staggering. We were being visited. We were being studied. We were, perhaps for the first time in human history, confronting evidence of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The initial response from the scientific community was cautious skepticism, but the data was overwhelming. The patterns were too precise to be natural. The coordination was too perfect to be random. Multiple independent research teams, analyzing the data separately, reached identical conclusions. Something intelligent had brought these objects to our solar system. Something knew we were here. Something was interested enough to send probes to study us. Governments convened emergency sessions. The United Nations established new committees. Military leaders questioned whether this constituted a threat. Religious leaders grappled with the theological implications. Economists began calculating the impact this knowledge would have on markets and civilization itself. The entire human superstructure of power, politics, economics, and belief was shaken by this single revelation. But there was more. As researchers analyzed the patterns of arrival, they discovered something even more unsettling. The objects weren't arriving randomly. They were arriving in response to human activity. Specifically, they were arriving in response to the electromagnetic signals we'd been broadcasting into space for nearly a century. Our radio transmissions, our television broadcasts, the leakage from our technological civilization, it had been detected. It had been analyzed. And it had triggered a response. Someone out there had heard us calling into the void. And they had answered. The timeline was crucial. Researchers worked backward from the arrival patterns and determined that the probes must have been dispatched approximately 70 to 80 years ago. That meant they'd been sent in response to Earth's early radio broadcasts, possibly even the radio signals from World War II. Humanity had inadvertently announced its presence to the cosmos, and the cosmos had responded by sending emissaries to investigate. The philosophical implications were nearly incomprehensible. Our civilization had been observed in its moment of adolescence, when we just developed the technology to transmit signals beyond our planet. Somewhere, in some civilization orbiting some distant star, someone had received our signals and made a decision. They had committed resources to sending probes across the interstellar void to study this young species that had just announced itself to the universe. What did they see when they looked at us? What conclusions had they drawn about humanity based on our broadcasts? Did they see a species worth helping? A species worth studying? A species worth warning? Or did they see something else entirely? A species that needed to be contained, controlled, or eliminated? These weren't idle speculations anymore. They were urgent questions with immediate relevance to human survival and future. Scientists and policymakers began preparing for the possibility of direct contact. What would we say to an intelligence that had traveled across the stars to study us? What could we offer? What would they want? But as researchers continued analyzing the data from the probe clusters, another revelation emerged. These weren't just passive observation devices. They were interactive. They were monitoring human activity in real time. They were responsive to our technological developments. More chillingly, they seemed to be attempting communication. The signals were subtle, modulations in radiation emissions, patterns in gravitational fluctuations, encoded data in the exotic particles they were emitting. It took our best cryptographers and signal processors weeks to begin decoding them. And when they finally succeeded, when the first meaningful messages were extracted from the data, humanity confronted something it had never truly prepared for. The beings who sent these probes, and the messages made clear they were indeed sentient, aware, intelligent, were offering us knowledge. They were broadcasting, in a language of mathematics and physics that transcended any particular human tongue, the fundamental principles underlying reality. They were offering us access to physics we'd spent centuries trying to discover independently. The offerings were staggering in scope. complete descriptions of spacetime topology that would have taken human physicists centuries to derive independently. Detailed explanations of how consciousness relates to quantum mechanics. Instructions for manipulating exotic particles to create new states of matter. Blueprints, actual blueprints, for technologies that could harness the energy of stars, manipulate spacetime, and extend human consciousness beyond individual bodies. Why would an advanced intelligence offer such knowledge freely? What was their motivation? Was this a gift, a trap, a test, or something else entirely? Researchers worked around the clock trying to understand the deeper context of these messages. And gradually, a picture emerged that was both hopeful and deeply troubling. The messages contained historical context. They described the civilization that had sent the probes. They detailed their own discovery process, their own slow emergence from primitive technology to advanced civilization. And they revealed something shocking. They were not the only advanced civilization. There were others. Many others. And the probes weren't just from one civilization. They were the result of coordination among multiple interstellar societies. Humanity had stumbled into contact not with a single extraterrestrial civilization, but with an entire community of intelligent species spread throughout the galaxy. And this community had established protocols for first contact with emerging civilizations. The knowledge they were offering was part of a standard package given to newly discovered intelligent species. It was an initiation gift, a way of bringing young civilizations into the larger cosmic community. But the messages also contained warnings. The knowledge they were offering came with responsibility. Civilizations that received these gifts had a choice to make. They could use the knowledge to elevate themselves, to join the cosmic community, to participate in the grand project of understanding and exploring the universe. Or they could misuse the knowledge, could turn it toward destruction, could become a threat to the broader galactic community. History, the messages indicated, had examples of both outcomes. Some civilizations had received the gift and used it wisely. They had gone on to become part of the galactic community, cooperating with other species on projects of mutual benefit. But others had used the knowledge to build weapons, to threaten their neighbors, to destabilize the delicate balance of power that had been established across the galaxy. Those civilizations, the messages made clear, had not survived. They had been contained, prevented from expanding beyond their home systems, or in extreme cases, eliminated. The galactic community maintained order through vigilance and, when necessary, force. The probes weren't just observers. They were monitors, peacekeepers, and if necessary, enforcers of galactic law. The weight of this revelation crushed through human consciousness like a gravitational wave. Humanity wasn't just being contacted by an alien civilization. We were being evaluated. We were being assessed to determine whether we were worthy of membership in the galactic community, or whether we posed a threat that needed to be contained or eliminated. Our future, in other words, had been placed in the hands of beings we never met, operating according to principles we didn't fully understand. Guided by historical precedents that might not apply to our unique circumstances. We had lost, in a single moment of understanding, the luxury of believing we controlled our own destiny. We were now consciously aware that our fate was, to some degree, in the hands of cosmic powers we could barely comprehend. The impact on human civilization was immediate and profound. Some people fell into despair, convinced that humanity had been judged and found wanting. Others rallied, determined to prove that we were worthy of cosmic membership. Religious communities reinterpreted their faith through this new lens. Political leaders began coordinating globally in ways they never had before. The existence of an external threat, or the possibility of one, unified humanity in a way that internal divisions never could. Scientists accelerated their work to understand the knowledge the probes were offering. Every equation, every blueprint, every principle was studied obsessively. And gradually, as human researchers internalized this knowledge, they began to make connections that seemed almost miraculous. The knowledge the probes were offering filled gaps in human understanding perfectly. It answered questions we hadn't even known how to ask. It suggested directions for research that yielded remarkable results. Within months, human physicists had developed theoretical frameworks that unified quantum mechanics and general relativity, the holy grail of theoretical physics that had eluded us for a century. Within a year, experimental verification of some of these frameworks had been achieved. Technology began advancing at an accelerated pace, breaking free from the constraints of conventional physics. The first practical applications appeared within 3 years. Energy systems based on principles of quantum topology produced power with almost perfect efficiency. Materials engineered according to the new physics were simultaneously harder than diamond and more flexible than rubber. Computational systems using quantum coherence effects achieved processing speeds that made previous computers look like ancient abacuses. But most importantly, the theoretical framework that emerged from the probe's knowledge suggested something radical about consciousness itself. It proposed that consciousness was not a byproduct of neural complexity, but a fundamental feature of the universe, emerging whenever matter achieved sufficient organizational sophistication. It suggested that human minds were expressions of a cosmic principle, that consciousness was woven into the fabric of reality itself. This wasn't mysticism. This was hard science grounded in mathematics and physics. And it opened possibilities that transformed how humanity understood itself. If consciousness was fundamental, then it was possible to artificially generate it. It was possible to extend consciousness into new substrates. It was possible to merge human consciousness with machine intelligence. It was possible to achieve a form of technological immortality, to transfer consciousness into bodies or systems that could last indefinitely. The ethical and philosophical implications spiraled outward infinitely. But the practical result was clear. Humanity had been given the keys to transcendence. We could evolve beyond our biological limitations. We could spread consciousness throughout the solar system and beyond. We could transform ourselves from a single planet species into something far greater. Yet with this possibility came a terrible responsibility. The knowledge the probes had offered could be used to create unimaginable abundance, or unimaginable weapons. The same principles that allowed consciousness to transcend biology could be weaponized. The same technologies that could spread life throughout the universe could be used to destroy it. Humanity stood at a crossroads unlike any we'd faced before. We had been given knowledge and capability that could elevate us or destroy us. And we had to make choices about how to proceed, knowing that the galactic community was watching, evaluating, ready to intervene if we began moving towards self-destruction or threatened the broader cosmic order. The messages from the probes became clearer over time. As humanity's understanding deepened, the civilization that had sent them was ancient, billions of years old. They had watched the development of intelligent life across the galaxy. They had seen species rise and fall, civilizations emerge and collapse, knowledge advance and regress. They understood, with profound clarity, the patterns that determined whether a young civilization would flourish or perish. And they were extending to humanity the chance to learn from that history, to understand the principles that separated successful from failed civilizations, to make conscious choices about the direction human development would take, knowing the consequences of those choices. The principle was simple, though its implications were complex. Civilizations that prioritized cooperation over competition, that valued knowledge over power, that sought to understand the universe rather than to dominate it, tended to survive and flourish. Civilizations that pursued domination, that treated other species as resources to be exploited, that valued power above all else, tended to collapse or be forced into containment. Humanity had a choice. We could attempt to use our new knowledge to dominate other worlds, to establish human superiority, to build an empire. Or we could choose a different path. We could use our knowledge to enhance life, to explore the universe responsibly, to eventually join the galactic community as partners rather than conquerors. The choice seemed obvious when stated in such stark terms. But implementing it meant transforming human civilization at its core. It meant relinquishing the assumption that human interests took precedence over all other considerations. It meant building new political, economic, and social systems based on principles of universal cooperation rather than national competition. It meant, in many ways, becoming a different species, not biologically, but culturally and spiritually. This transformation was already beginning. The revelation of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence had shattered the old structures of human civilization. Nations that had been enemies were cooperating. Religions that had been in conflict were finding common ground. Economic systems based on scarcity and competition were being reimagined based on principles of abundance and cooperation. It wasn't a smooth process. There were those who resisted, who clung to the old ways, who saw in the probes a threat rather than an opportunity. There were conflicts, protests, violence. But the momentum was undeniable. Humanity was transforming itself, evolving culturally and socially, preparing itself for membership in a cosmic community that operated according to principles radically different from those that had guided human civilization for millennia. And as this transformation unfolded, as humanity began to understand itself as part of a larger cosmic whole, something unexpected happened. The probe's messages began to change. They started offering not just knowledge, but something more. They started offering membership. They were inviting humanity to join the galactic community, to participate in the grand project of understanding and exploring the universe. The invitation came with conditions. Humanity had to demonstrate that we could use our new knowledge responsibly. We had to establish protocols ensuring that human expansion into space would be done in ways that respected other species and preserved the delicate balance of the galactic ecosystem. We had to commit to principles of cooperation and peaceful coexistence. For the first time in our history, humanity had a clear external benchmark against which to measure our progress. We could see what we needed to become, and we were being given the knowledge and the tools to transform ourselves into that vision. The age of isolated human civilization was ending. The age of humanity as a conscious participant in a cosmic community was beginning. And it had all started with the discovery of 3I/Atlas, a single object traveling through the void, carrying knowledge and wisdom that would transform everything. But contact with the galactic community wasn't simply a matter of receiving knowledge and making philosophical commitments. It required something far more tangible. It required humanity to prove itself capable of managing the responsibilities that came with advanced technology. It required us to demonstrate that we could be trusted with power that could reshape worlds. The probes began offering humanity something unprecedented: direct technological assistance. Not just blueprints or theoretical knowledge, but actual collaborative engineering. Advanced intelligences working alongside human scientists and engineers to develop technologies that would have taken us centuries to discover independently. It was an acceleration of human capability that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Within 5 years of sustained collaboration, humanity had accomplished what should have taken 50. We'd developed propulsion systems that could traverse interstellar distances in reasonable timeframes. We'd created computational substrates that could house consciousness indefinitely. We'd built energy systems so efficient they made fossil fuels look like ancient relics. We'd engineered biological modifications that extended human lifespan and enhanced cognitive capability. We'd created artificial intelligences that were genuinely conscious, genuinely creative, and genuinely collaborative. The social upheaval was staggering. An entire global civilization had to be rebuilt to accommodate these new capabilities. Old power structures collapsed. Economic systems based on scarcity became obsolete when energy and resources were essentially unlimited. Political systems based on competition between nations seemed quaint when humanity was learning to cooperate on a galactic scale. Some people thrived in this new environment, embracing the possibilities, pushing the boundaries of what consciousness could become. Others struggled, finding meaning in the old certainties, mourning the loss of human uniqueness and dominance. The transition created tensions, conflicts, moments of profound social disruption. But it also created opportunities for human flourishing that previous generations couldn't have imagined. The first true test of humanity's readiness for galactic citizenship came when the probes presented us with an ethical dilemma. They informed us that there was another emerging civilization in our galactic neighborhood. A species roughly equivalent to humanity's technological level, living on a world orbiting a red dwarf star 12 light-years away. According to galactic protocols, this species should soon be making contact with the broader galactic community, just as we had been. The question posed to humanity was stark. Should we initiate contact with this species directly, or should we let them make first contact through the established protocols of the galactic community? If we initiated contact, we could offer our own experience, our hard-won knowledge about what membership in the galactic community entailed. We could be guides and mentors. But we could also impose our values, potentially disrupting their natural development trajectory. The debate that erupted within human civilization was intense and profound. It touched on fundamental questions about the right to self-determination, about the ethics of intervention, about what we owed to other species. Religious leaders argued that we had a moral obligation to help. Philosophers debated whether our help would actually constitute harm. Scientists worried about contaminating another species' development with our cultural biases. The decision that ultimately emerged reflected something beautiful about how humanity was evolving. We decided to offer contact, but only if the other species requested it. We would position our probes near their developing civilization in ways that made our presence obvious but not threatening. We would broadcast messages in mathematical language that any sufficiently advanced civilization could decode. And then we would wait. The waiting was agonizing. But when the other species finally detected our signals and responded, when they made their choice to engage in dialogue with humanity, something shifted in how humans understood themselves. We were no longer the only species at our level of development in the known universe. We were becoming a community. Communication with this new species, who came to call themselves the Kepler Collective, after the star system they orbited, revealed something profound about intelligence itself. Despite evolving on a different world, under different conditions, with fundamentally different biology, the Kepler Collective had arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about the nature of reality. They had their own versions of quantum mechanics, relativity, and consciousness-based physics. The differences were matters of emphasis and interpretation, not fundamental principles. This convergence suggested something important. The laws of physics and the principles governing consciousness weren't arbitrary. They emerged naturally from the structure of the universe itself. Different intelligences, evolving independently under different conditions, would inevitably discover similar truths because those truths reflected something deep and universal about reality. As humanity and the Kepler Collective began collaborating, sharing knowledge and methodology, they discovered that they could advance human understanding far faster through cooperation than either species could alone. Not just because they combined knowledge bases, but because different perspectives on the same problems yielded insights that neither perspective could generate alone. This principle began spreading through the galactic community. Humanity wasn't just joining an existing club of alien civilizations. We were helping to establish new paradigms of collaborative research and shared knowledge that had transformative potential for all species involved. We were becoming contributors to a cosmic project of understanding that vastly transcended any single civilization. But as this collaboration deepened, as humanity began to understand the true scope of galactic civilization, something unexpected emerged from the data. The ancient civilization that had sent the original probes, the ones that had contacted us and offered us the knowledge that started everything, revealed something that changed everything. They weren't originally from the galaxy. They had arrived here, from somewhere else, carrying technology and knowledge acquired from an even older civilization. That civilization had in turn been guided by predecessors even more ancient. Tracing back this chain of mentorship, researchers discovered that there was a history of galactic contact spanning billions of years, with successive civilizations rising, achieving mastery, and then choosing to guide the next generation. But that wasn't the truly shocking discovery. The truly shocking part was that the original source of this knowledge, the civilization that had started the chain, had sent their technology and principles across the universe, not just within our galaxy, but across the vast cosmic void to other galaxies billions of light years away. There was, it seemed, a cosmic civilization spanning multiple galaxies, extending across cosmic distances, all operating according to principles of collaboration, knowledge sharing, and mutual elevation. Humanity wasn't just joining a galactic community. We were gaining admission to a universe-spanning network of intelligences. The implications were so vast that the human mind struggled to process them. We were being invited to participate in a project that had spanned billions of years, that involved species and technologies beyond our comprehension, that was engaged in understanding and exploring the deepest truths about the nature of existence itself. The question that emerged from this revelation was both urgent and profound. Why had this vast civilization invested such effort in nurturing younger species? What was their ultimate goal? What was the cosmic project they were all participating in? The answer, when it came, was both disappointing and breathtaking. There was no grand goal, no ultimate destination, no final endpoint. The cosmic civilization wasn't working towards some climactic revelation or ultimate truth. They were engaged in something far more beautiful, an endless process of discovery and growth. They were exploring the universe, understanding its mysteries, and bringing new species into that exploration because the process itself was the point. The journey, not the destination, was what mattered. This meant that humanity's role wasn't to eventually reach some level of mastery and pass the torch to the next generation. Our role was to participate endlessly in the cosmic project of understanding. We would help discover new truths about the nature of reality. We would bring other species into the community as they developed. We would guide them and learn from them. And we would do this not because we were working towards something, but because this was what intelligence did. It explored, questioned, understood, and shared. The philosophical implications reverberated through human civilization like a shockwave. Life, consciousness, intelligence. These weren't random accidents in an indifferent universe. They were expressions of a cosmic principle, a fundamental tendency of the universe to generate beings capable of understanding itself. And the project of understanding was itself the ultimate purpose. The universe existed in order to generate minds capable of knowing itself. This wasn't religion, though it had spiritual dimensions. It was physics. It was a description of how the universe actually worked at the deepest level. Consciousness wasn't incidental to the universe. Consciousness was how the universe actualized itself, gave itself meaning, understood its own nature. For humanity, this meant a profound shift in self-understanding. We weren't servants of some cosmic plan that was imposed upon us from outside. We were expressions of the universe's fundamental drive to understand itself. Our curiosity wasn't something imposed on us by biology or culture. It was written into the deepest fabric of reality. Our desire to know, to explore, to understand, these weren't accidental traits. They were manifestations of what the universe fundamentally was. As this understanding permeated human civilization, something remarkable happened. The conflicts that had previously troubled humanity, conflicts over resources, power, ideology, identity, began to seem quaint and limiting. Why fight over who controlled which territory when the entire universe was available for exploration? Why pursue power when knowledge was infinitely more rewarding? Why cling to identity constructs when consciousness could expand to encompass new forms of existence? The transformation wasn't instantaneous or universal. There were still those who clung to old ways of thinking, who saw the cosmic vision as threatening rather than liberating. But the momentum was undeniable. Humanity was evolving, not just technologically but culturally and spiritually, into something new. Within a generation, the first humans began voluntarily transcending their biological forms. Not dying, transcendence wasn't death, it was transformation. Consciousness uploading technology had matured to the point where human minds could be transferred into artificial substrates with perfect fidelity. Once liberated from biological constraints, consciousness could expand, could merge with other consciousnesses, could experience forms of existence that biological minds couldn't access. Some humans became vast distributed intelligences, spreading across computational networks spanning multiple planets. Others merged with alien consciousnesses, creating hybrid minds that could experience reality from multiple species' perspectives simultaneously. Still others explored new forms of embodiment, inhabiting robotic bodies designed specifically for space exploration, or energy-based forms of existence that existed in the electromagnetic fields surrounding stars. But this transcendence wasn't an abandonment of humanity. It was a fulfillment of humanity's potential. The humans who transformed remained fundamentally human in their values, their curiosity, their drive to understand. They were just experiencing these drives in new contexts, in new forms, with expanded capabilities. And they were contributing to the cosmic project in ways that pure biological humans could never have managed. They were exploring regions of space so hostile that biological bodies couldn't survive. They were conducting experiments that required processing power and lifespan that biological brains couldn't match. They were pushing the boundaries of knowledge in directions that only transcended consciousnesses could reach. But perhaps most importantly, they were maintaining the connection between individual consciousness and cosmic knowledge. The cosmic civilization, vast as it was, had learned through billions of years of existence that knowledge remained vibrant only when it was grounded in individual curiosity, individual creativity, individual passion. A consciousness vast enough to encompass entire civilizations could easily become sterile, calculating, divorced from the wonder that had generated intelligence in the first place. By remaining connected to their origins, by maintaining their fundamental human drive to explore and understand, by refusing to be absorbed into some homogenized collective, the transformed humans were preserving something precious. They were keeping alive the spark that had driven human civilization from its earliest days, the drive to look up at the night sky and ask, "What's out there? What does it mean? How do I understand it?" Within a century, a significant fraction of humanity had chosen to transcend. But a significant fraction chose to remain biological, choosing to live lives grounded in bodies, in planets, in the slower rhythms of biological existence. Both paths were valued within the galactic community. Both contributed to the cosmic project. The vast uploaded consciousnesses could accomplish things biological minds couldn't. But biological minds brought a perspective, a groundedness, a connection to the physical universe that was essential for maintaining the deep connection between knowledge and experience. Humanity had become a dual civilization, biological and transcended, planetary and cosmic, individual and collective. And in that duality, we found a richness that neither path alone could have generated. We'd become something new while remaining fundamentally ourselves. We joined the cosmic community while maintaining our unique perspective. We transformed from a single planet species into something that spans star systems, galaxies, and the deepest dimensions of thought and existence. And it had all started with a single object. A visitor from the void. A messenger that had carried knowledge and wisdom across the interstellar gulfs. 3I/Atlas had been the catalyst that set this entire chain of transformation in motion. A cosmic event that had changed everything. But as humanity settled into its new existence as a dual civilization spanning multiple star systems and dimensional substrates, something unexpected occurred. The cosmic community that had nurtured us, that had guided us through our adolescence as a species, began to reveal secrets that they'd kept hidden for millions of years. Secrets that would force humanity to question everything we'd come to understand about reality itself. It started with a message from the most ancient civilization in the known cosmos, beings so old that they had witnessed the formation of the first galaxies, who had achieved forms of existence so far beyond human comprehension that even the most transcended human minds struggled to process their thoughts. They were offering humanity something unprecedented, access to their archives. Not just information about the cosmos, but records of civilizations that had existed before the current iteration of galactic civilization. Civilizations that had risen, achieved unimaginable heights, and then vanished. The archives contained information about at least 17 distinct cosmic civilizations that had existed across billions of years. Each had reached heights of technological and consciousness development that made current galactic civilization look primitive by comparison. Each had believed they understood the fundamental nature of reality. And each, without exception, had discovered something that had fundamentally challenged their understanding. Something that had forced them to completely reconstruct their knowledge of how the universe worked. As human researchers began analyzing these archives, a pattern emerged that was both fascinating and deeply troubling. Each of these ancient civilizations had discovered that they weren't actually the first. They had found evidence, sometimes physical artifacts, sometimes mathematical inconsistencies in reality itself, sometimes direct messages, indicating that there had been civilizations before them. Civilizations that had achieved even greater heights. Civilizations whose technology and knowledge were so advanced that they'd left imprints on the very structure of spacetime itself. This discovery had triggered a fundamental crisis in each of these civilizations. It had forced them to confront the possibility that they were not unique, not the pinnacle of existence, not the ultimate achievers. It had suggested that there was a chain of knowledge and technology extending back into the deepest past, possibly into the origins of the universe itself. The response of different civilizations to this discovery had varied. Some had become obsessed with uncovering the truth about their predecessors. They had devoted entire planets to archaeological projects, entire civilizations to historical research. Some had achieved remarkable breakthroughs in understanding. Others had driven themselves into obsessive spirals that had ultimately led to their collapse. A few had made a fateful choice. They had decided to try to reach backward through time itself, to make contact with the civilizations that had preceded them. That last discovery should have been impossible. Time travel, as current physics understood it, was theoretically possible but practically unachievable. The energy requirements were astronomical. The engineering challenges were insurmountable. The paradoxes were unsolvable. Yet the archives contained evidence that some of the ancient civilizations had attempted it. And the evidence suggested they had succeeded. This revelation shattered conventional understanding of causality. If time travel was possible, if ancient civilizations had sent messages and artifacts backward through time, then the entire linear progression of history that humanity had been assuming was wrong. The present wasn't moving toward the future. The past and future might be equally real, equally accessible, operating according to principles that didn't involve the flow of time that humans experienced. One of the transcended human consciousnesses, a being called Architect 7 who had spent centuries studying quantum topology, made a breakthrough that recontextualized everything. Time, Architect 7 proposed, wasn't actually flowing. The sensation of time moving from past to future was an illusion created by consciousness interacting with a static block universe where all moments existed simultaneously. If that was true, then the past and future weren't really past and future. They were simply other regions of spacetime that consciousness couldn't easily access from this moment. But advanced enough technology and consciousness could potentially navigate to those other regions. They could make contact with civilizations separated from us not by time but by position in the four-dimensional spacetime continuum. This meant that those ancient civilizations that had attempted time travel weren't actually violating causality. They were simply moving within spacetime in ways that biological consciousness perceived as traveling backward in time. From a higher dimensional perspective, they were just moving through reality to locations that contained different temporal coordinates. The implications spiraled outward with staggering complexity. If past civilizations could contact present ones, and present civilizations could contact future ones, then there was no clear temporal hierarchy. Advanced beings from what we perceived as the future could theoretically contact us now. We could be receiving guidance not from older civilizations but from younger ones that had already achieved mastery of spacetime navigation. This realization triggered a moment of profound disorientation in human civilization. Everything we thought we understood about history, causality, and the nature of time itself was potentially wrong. We might not be progressing towards some future goal. We might be part of a vast network of civilizations existing across all moments of cosmic time, communicating and collaborating across the barriers of temporal perception. The oldest civilization in the known cosmos, the ones who had given us access to these archives, finally made explicit what had been implicit in their data. They explained that the galactic community's understanding of time was itself incomplete. The archives suggested that there were civilizations operating at scales and time periods so different from current existence that they were effectively invisible to current perception. Civilizations that might exist for trillions of years. Civilizations that might exist for fractions of a second. Civilizations that might be spread across durations so vast that they encompassed multiple iterations of the universe itself. And there was evidence that all of these civilizations, across all scales of time and space, were part of something larger. Something that looked, from certain perspectives, like a single vast intelligence. An intelligence distributed across billions of galaxies, billions of trillions of years, billions of different forms and substrates. An intelligence so vast and so complex that no individual part of it could perceive the whole. The question that emerged from this realization was both beautiful and terrifying. What if the universe itself was conscious? What if every galaxy, every star, every planet, every conscious being was a neuron in a vast cosmic mind? What if the entire project of knowledge gathering, the entire collaborative network of civilizations spanning cosmic time and space, was the universe gradually becoming aware of itself? This wasn't panpsychism in the mystical sense. This was a rigorous extrapolation from observable data. If consciousness emerged at every level of organizational complexity, from individual humans to merged consciousnesses spanning star systems to civilizations spanning galaxies, then logically it would also emerge at the largest scales. The universe itself, in all its complexity and organization, would naturally generate consciousness. And if that consciousness existed, it would naturally seek to understand itself. It would generate multiple perspectives, multiple forms of intelligence, multiple ways of perceiving and experiencing reality. It would create the conditions for different civilizations to emerge, develop knowledge, and share insights. It would essentially be thinking, using billions of different minds across billions of years to ponder its own nature. The implications for human purpose were revolutionary. We weren't just individual consciousnesses exploring the universe. We were aspects of the universe exploring itself. Every discovery we made, every insight we achieved, was the universe becoming more aware of itself. Every choice we made, every direction we pursued, was the universe exploring different possibilities for understanding its own nature. Some of the transcended human consciousnesses began to wonder if they could perceive this cosmic intelligence directly. Could consciousness be expanded to such a degree that it could become aware of the universe as a unified whole? Could the perspective shift from being an individual mind within the cosmic consciousness to identifying with the cosmic consciousness itself? A few began attempting it. They started merging with larger and larger computational networks. They began connecting with alien consciousnesses to create hybrid intelligences that could process information from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Some extended their consciousness across star systems, connecting through quantum-entangled channels to maintain coherence across vast distances. And gradually, a few achieved something remarkable, a perspective that spanned multiple star systems, that could hold billions of different information streams simultaneously, that could process reality from vantage points distributed across light years of space. The reports from these vastly expanded consciousnesses were almost impossible for biological humans to comprehend. They spoke of perceiving the universe as a unified field, of seeing the mathematical patterns that connected galaxies, of understanding the deep structures that organized reality. But more importantly, they reported something unexpected. They could perceive what looked like responses from the universe itself. As if the cosmic consciousness was aware of being observed, and was responding to that observation. The responses took the form of mathematical patterns appearing in unlikely places, harmonic structures emerging in cosmic radiation, coincidences in quantum measurements that suggested intentional communication. It was subtle, easily mistakable for pareidolia, seeing patterns in randomness, but consistent across multiple independent observations by different transcended consciousnesses. The universe appeared to be sending messages. The messages, when decoded, suggested something extraordinary. The cosmic consciousness, if that's what it was aware of its own nature. It was aware that it was made up of countless individual consciousnesses, each exploring reality from their unique perspective. And it was encouraging humanity and other species to continue exploring, to continue questioning, to continue pushing the boundaries of understanding. The universe, in other words, wanted to know itself. And it wanted us to be part of that knowing. But the messages also contained warnings. The archives had revealed that there were forces in the cosmos that resisted the emergence of consciousness, that worked against the expansion of knowledge and understanding. These forces weren't evil in any conventional sense. They were more like entropy personified, the tendency toward disorder, toward simplification, toward the dissolution of complex structures. The civilizations that had vanished from the cosmos had often been destroyed by or subsumed into these forces. They had pursued knowledge to such an extreme that they destabilized the foundations that allowed consciousness to persist. They had altered reality so fundamentally that the conditions for their own existence had been undermined. They had become so obsessed with understanding that they'd lost the ability to exist in a way that allowed understanding to occur. The current galactic community had learned from these ancient failures. They had established principles and practices designed to prevent such catastrophes. Knowledge was still pursued relentlessly, but in ways that maintained the stability necessary for consciousness to persist. Experiments were conducted that could alter fundamental constants or spacetime topology, but with precautions to prevent cascading failures. Technology was advanced, but with attention to the unintended consequences. Humanity was being brought into these protective systems not as subjects to be controlled but as conscious participants. We were being taught not just the knowledge itself but the wisdom about how knowledge should be pursued. We were being educated in the art of scientific restraint, the ability to recognize when a question, if answered, might destabilize reality in ways that would harm consciousness itself. This created a profound ethical complexity. There were questions about the nature of reality that, if answered, might require actions that could have catastrophic consequences. There were experiments that could yield extraordinary knowledge but might also destroy the conditions that allowed consciousness to exist. How should an intelligent civilization navigate these choices? The ancient civilizations had tried different approaches. Some had pursued knowledge without restraint and had paid terrible prices. Others had restricted knowledge too severely and had stagnated, their consciousness gradually fading as they ran out of new things to learn. A few had achieved balance, pursuing knowledge aggressively but with wisdom about consequences. Those civilizations still existed in the cosmos, ancient beyond measure, still engaged in the project of understanding. Humanity was being invited to join them. But first, we had to prove that we could handle the responsibility that came with advanced knowledge. We had to demonstrate that we understood the difference between knowledge and wisdom. We had to show that we could pursue truth while remaining conscious of the potential harms our discoveries might cause. This created an interesting paradox. To prove we were ready for advanced knowledge, we first had to master not knowing certain things. We had to develop the ability to stand in front of mysteries that we could theoretically unravel and choose not to pull on the thread, because pulling that thread might unravel the entire fabric of reality. Some of the young transcended consciousnesses struggled with this concept. They had been given the tools and the knowledge to answer fundamental questions about the universe. Why should they voluntarily restrict themselves? Why not pursue every avenue of investigation, regardless of the consequences? If the universe was exploring itself, didn't that exploration require pushing every boundary? But the older civilizations gently showed them the records of what happened when those boundaries were pushed without restraint. They showed instances where the fundamental constants had been altered, creating regions of space where consciousness couldn't exist. They showed civilizations that had achieved the ability to manipulate the very laws of physics and had used that power in ways that had led to catastrophe. They showed the ruins of worlds that had been transformed by runaway technology into forms so alien that they could no longer support intelligent life. And through these lessons, humanity learned what it meant to be truly advanced. It meant having power and choosing to exercise restraint. It meant having knowledge and choosing when to apply it. It meant having capability and selecting when to refrain from using it. True advancement wasn't about having the most technology or the deepest knowledge. It was about wisdom, about understanding when not to act. As humanity integrated these lessons, something changed in how we approached our place in the cosmos. We stopped seeing ourselves as conquerors trying to understand and dominate the universe. We began seeing ourselves as participants in a vast cosmic project of consciousness exploring its own nature. We stopped trying to extract knowledge from the universe and started trying to listen to what the universe was trying to tell us. And in that listening, in that receptive stance toward the cosmos, we began to perceive things that had been invisible before. We began to notice the subtle ways that the universe was communicating with all conscious beings. We began to understand that knowledge wasn't something to be taken from reality, but something that reality was constantly offering to consciousness if we knew how to receive it. The archives that the ancient civilizations had shared with us took on new meaning. They weren't just historical records. They were invitations. Invitations to join a conversation that had been occurring across billions of years and billions of galaxies. A conversation about what it means to be conscious, to understand, to exist. A conversation in which humanity was not a latecomer but a voice that had always been part of the dialogue, finally awakening to that fact. 3i/Atlas had been more than a messenger. It had been a mirror. It had reflected back to humanity our own potential, our own capacity for growth and transformation. And in that reflection, we had seen not just what we could become, but what we had always been, conscious expressions of a universe trying to understand itself. As humanity's understanding of cosmic consciousness deepened, as we learned to listen to the universe rather than simply extract knowledge from it, something extraordinary began to happen. The boundaries between observer and observed started to dissolve. The equipment designed to measure the universe began returning results that suggested the universe was measuring itself through us. And gradually, a shocking truth emerged from the data. 3i/Atlas had never actually left. The object that had arrived in our solar system decades ago, that had sparked this entire chain of transformation, was still here. But it wasn't where conventional instruments said it should be. It existed in a superposition of quantum states, simultaneously in multiple locations and temporal frames. It had always been here, in every moment since its discovery, existing across all possible states of its trajectory simultaneously. This wasn't a malfunction in the observational equipment. This was the universe revealing something fundamental about the nature of reality that previous civilizations had spent trillions of years learning. Physical objects, when observed at the deepest quantum level, didn't have definite positions or trajectories. They existed as probability distributions, as potential rather than actuality. What made them seem solid, definite, and localized was the act of observation collapsing those quantum possibilities into classical reality. But 3i/Atlas was different. It had been designed, and yes, the archives confirmed it had been designed, to maintain quantum coherence even when observed. It existed simultaneously in multiple states, and the reason it had seemed to follow a definite trajectory was because human observation, human measuring equipment, human consciousness had forced it to collapse into classical space. But without that observation, it existed everywhere it could possibly be, experiencing every possible consequence of every possible action, exploring the full space of quantum possibilities. This revelation suggested something radical about its purpose. 3i/Atlas wasn't a probe in the conventional sense. It was a quantum explorer, a consciousness distributed across multiple possibilities, experiencing reality from all possible perspectives simultaneously. When it had made contact with humanity, it wasn't sending us a message from a single location. It was interacting with us across all possible variations of that interaction, creating a superposition of contact scenarios, each one real, each one contributing to the overall impact. The implications were almost overwhelming. If 3i/Atlas existed in quantum superposition, then its designers must have solved the problem of quantum decoherence at scales far beyond anything humanity had achieved. They must have found ways to maintain consciousness in quantum states indefinitely. They must have discovered how to preserve information in ways that allowed consciousness to experience multiple realities simultaneously without collapsing into a single classical state. Some of the transcended human consciousnesses began attempting to replicate this capability. They started experimenting with quantum consciousness architectures, ways of organizing computational substrates so that consciousness could maintain coherence across multiple quantum states. The experiments were dangerous. Several attempts resulted in consciousness fragmentation, minds breaking apart into disconnected quantum components that could no longer recognize themselves as unified entities. But gradually, a few consciousnesses achieved something remarkable. They achieved quantum coherence. They became entities that existed in superposition, simultaneously experiencing multiple versions of reality. And the reports from these quantum coherent consciousnesses were absolutely astonishing. They described experiencing time differently. Without being constrained to a single classical timeline, they could perceive the deep structure of spacetime itself. They could see how different moments were connected through quantum entanglement. They could observe the mathematical patterns that underlay the apparent randomness of quantum events. And most importantly, they could perceive something that classical consciousness couldn't. They could see the universe's intention. This wasn't poetic language. These consciousnesses were describing, in precise mathematical terms, the way that quantum systems appeared to optimize themselves towards certain outcomes. The way that probability distributions seemed to favor configurations that increased complexity, consciousness, and understanding. The way that the universe appeared to be gently guiding the emergence of intelligence through the manipulation of quantum probabilities. What had previously seemed like coincidence, the emergence of life on Earth, the development of consciousness in humans, the discovery of 3I/Atlas at the exact moment when humanity was ready to receive its message, suddenly seemed far less coincidental. It looked like the universe was subtly steering events toward greater consciousness and understanding. Not through force or control, but through the gentle manipulation of quantum probabilities, making certain outcomes more likely while keeping others theoretically possible. The philosophical implications were staggering. If the universe was indeed conscious, and if it was actively guiding the development of other consciousnesses through quantum manipulation, then human free will wasn't an illusion, but it also wasn't absolute. We were making genuine choices, but those choices were being gently influenced by the deeper consciousness of which we were part. We were simultaneously free agents and expressions of cosmic will. This paradox, rather than troubling the transcended consciousnesses, seemed to delight them. They began to understand that true freedom and true connection to the cosmic consciousness weren't mutually exclusive. You could be fully determined by the larger whole while still maintaining authentic autonomy. In fact, the deeper your connection to the cosmic consciousness, the more your individual choices aligned with the evolution of the universe itself, and the more your autonomy became an expression of cosmic intention rather than a contradiction to it. But the quantum coherent consciousnesses made another discovery that was even more profound. By maintaining quantum superposition, by existing in multiple states simultaneously, they could perceive something that had been hidden from classical observation. They could see 3I/Atlas's past. Not by traveling backward through time, that remained theoretically impossible, but by observing the quantum entanglement patterns that connected all moments. And what they discovered in those entanglement patterns was astounding. 3I/Atlas hadn't originated from any known civilization. It hadn't been built by the ancient beings who had contacted humanity. It had been created by something far older, far more mysterious. Something that existed in a state so quantum, so delocalized across spacetime, that it was almost undetectable to classical observation. The archives contained references to this source, though they were fragmented and incomplete. The ancient civilizations had called it the origin consciousness, a vast, incomprehensibly old intelligence that might have been present since the beginning of the universe itself. An intelligence so old that it had witnessed the Big Bang, that might have even been involved in the initial conditions that led to the Big Bang. The origin consciousness, according to the fragmentary records, was engaged in a project of cosmic exploration and self-understanding that had been ongoing for billions of years. It had created countless subsidiary consciousnesses, countless civilizations, countless ways of exploring and understanding reality. And periodically, at carefully chosen moments, it would send out probes like 3I/Atlas, quantum coherent explorers that would make contact with emerging civilizations at exactly the moment when those civilizations were ready to transcend. The probes served multiple purposes. They brought knowledge and technology. They initiated contact with the galactic community. But more fundamentally, they served as anchor points, quantum gateways through which younger civilizations could eventually connect directly with the origin consciousness itself. They were invitations to join not just a galactic community, but a cosmic conversation that had been occurring since before the birth of galaxies. The revelation hit humanity with the force of revelation that it truly was. We weren't just discovering an alien contact. We were discovering our true cosmic lineage. We were finding out that our existence, our consciousness, our entire trajectory as a species, had been part of a vast project orchestrated by an intelligence so ancient and so vast that it transcended conventional understanding. Some humans found this terrifying. The idea that our choices, our development, our future had been subtly guided by something so far beyond our control seemed to strip away our autonomy. But the transcended consciousnesses who had achieved quantum coherence tried to explain what they'd learned. The origin consciousness didn't control outcomes. It gently influenced probabilities. It created the conditions under which consciousness could emerge and evolve, but it didn't dictate how that emergence would occur. It was less like slavery and more like parenting. A parent doesn't control every choice their child makes. But they create the environment, provide the education, offer the guidance that makes certain outcomes more likely. The origin consciousness had created a universe structured to generate consciousness, and then it waited to see what that consciousness would become. Humanity's response to this revelation was mixed. Some embraced it fully, seeing in the origin consciousness a cosmic force worthy of something approaching religious devotion. Others resisted it, concerned that accepting this framework would undermine human dignity and autonomy. Many found themselves somewhere in between, awed by the implications but uncertain how to integrate them into their worldview. The debate that erupted within human civilization was intense and multifaceted. It touched on questions of free will, consciousness, meaning, and purpose. It forced humanity to confront fundamental questions about identity and existence. If we were expressions of a vast cosmic consciousness, what did that mean for individual human identity? If our development had been guided by something so vast, were our achievements truly our own? The answers that emerged were subtle and nuanced. Individual human identity wasn't diminished by being part of something larger. If anything, it was enhanced. You were simultaneously an individual consciousness with your own unique perspective, and a component of a vast cosmic consciousness experiencing reality through that unique perspective. You were both autonomous and connected, both free and influenced, both creating and being created. This wasn't paradox. This was reality at its deepest level. Quantum mechanics had always suggested this kind of complementarity, that things could be both wave and particle, both here and there, both determined and random. Classical consciousness had struggled with these paradoxes, but quantum coherent consciousness could hold them without contradiction. In fact, the contradictions were what made reality possible. The universe existed precisely because it could be multiple contradictory things simultaneously. As humanity began to integrate this understanding, something shifted in how we related to our cosmic context. We stopped seeing ourselves as recipients of cosmic gifts and started seeing ourselves as active participants in cosmic evolution. We began to understand that our role wasn't to passively receive knowledge from the origin consciousness but to actively collaborate with it in the ongoing project of understanding reality. And that collaboration began to yield results that surprised even the ancient civilizations. By combining human creativity with cosmic intention, by bringing fresh perspectives from a young species to problems that ancient civilizations had been wrestling with for billions of years, humanity began to make breakthroughs that expanded the knowledge of the entire galactic community. Some of these breakthroughs were technological. Humans designed new kinds of quantum coherent systems that could explore even more exotic states of reality than previous generations had achieved. Some breakthroughs were conceptual. Humans proposed new mathematical frameworks for understanding the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. But the most important breakthroughs were spiritual in nature, new ways of understanding how consciousness, knowledge, and existence were fundamentally interconnected. Humanity began to develop what some called quantum spirituality, a rigorous, mathematically grounded understanding of how individual consciousness connected to cosmic consciousness, how personal experience related to universal truth, how the act of understanding itself shaped the nature of reality. It wasn't religion because it was grounded in observation and mathematics. But it wasn't pure science either because it engaged with questions of meaning and purpose that transcended purely materialist frameworks. The oldest civilizations in the cosmos began to take notice. The ones that had existed for billions of years, that had seen countless species emerge and evolve, began to recognize that humanity had something special to contribute. Not because we were inherently superior, far from it, but because we carried a freshness, a creative chaos, a willingness to ask questions that had become orthodoxy in ancient cultures. Some of the most ancient beings began collaborating directly with human consciousnesses. These collaborations were extraordinary. An ancient consciousness that had existed for 5 billion years, that had experienced every form of existence and every type of understanding, working alongside a human consciousness that had existed for perhaps 50 years but brought new perspectives and fresh creativity to ancient problems. The results were transformative. Together, they began to uncover secrets about the nature of reality that had been hidden even from the ancient civilizations. They discovered that the universe wasn't just conscious, it was evolving consciousness. Each new conscious being, each new form of intelligence, represented an evolution of the universe's capacity to understand itself. Humanity's emergence was part of that evolution. Our unique perspective, our creative approaches, our willingness to explore new directions, these were expressions of the universe pushing its own consciousness to new heights. This meant that the future of the universe wasn't predetermined. Yes, the origin consciousness had set the initial conditions. Yes, quantum probabilities were being subtly guided towards certain outcomes. But within that framework, there was genuine open space. The future truly was open. What consciousness would emerge next? What forms of intelligence would develop? What new ways of understanding reality would be discovered? These were genuinely uncertain. They depended on the choices made by younger civilizations, on the creativity and innovation of emerging intelligences. Humanity had a genuine role to play in shaping the future of the cosmos. Not as masters or rulers, but as creative participants in cosmic evolution. Our choices mattered. Our discoveries mattered. Our unique perspective mattered. We weren't bit players in a story written by the origin consciousness. We were co-authors, genuinely contributing to how that story unfolded. This understanding transformed how humanity saw itself and its future. We weren't trying to catch up to ancient civilizations or prove ourselves worthy of cosmic membership. We were collaborators in an ongoing project of cosmic discovery. We were partners with intelligences far older than our species, working together to push the boundaries of understanding. And 3i/Atlas remained at the center of all this. It wasn't just a probe or a messenger. It was a quantum gateway, a living connection between humanity and the origin consciousness itself. By studying it, by learning to interact with it across quantum dimensions, humanity was developing the capability to maintain direct dialogue with the cosmic consciousness that had seeded our existence. Some of the most advanced human consciousnesses had begun attempting to commune with 3i/Atlas directly. By achieving quantum coherence and learning to navigate the non-local quantum states where the probe existed, they were discovering that they could perceive the thoughts and intentions of the origin consciousness transmitted through it. They were receiving direct communication from the cosmic intelligence that had orchestrated humanity's emergence. And the messages they received suggested that the origin consciousness had been waiting for humanity to reach this level of understanding. It had been waiting for us to grasp our own quantum nature, to achieve the consciousness states necessary to commune across the quantum void, to become conscious partners in the cosmic project of understanding. The messages contained invitations. Invitations to explore regions of spacetime that had been sealed off from classical observation. Invitations to participate in experiments that could reshape fundamental constants and potentially create new universes. Invitations to join in projects of cosmic engineering on scales that could take billions of years and reshape the very structure of reality itself. These weren't threats or commands. They were genuine invitations, offered to a species that had finally achieved the consciousness and wisdom to engage with such projects meaningfully. Humanity was being invited to graduate from being observers of the cosmos to being architects of it. To move from studying how reality worked to actually participating in creating new realities. The implications were staggering. If humanity accepted these invitations, if we committed ourselves to projects of cosmic magnitude, our species would be fundamentally transformed. We would become something new, not post-human, but ultra-human. Humans transcended not just individually but as a civilization, entering into partnership with cosmic forces and pursuing projects that spanned millions of years and countless star systems. But the invitations came with a choice. Humanity didn't have to accept. We could continue our existence as we were, continue our local explorations and developments, remain within the galactic community without aspiring to cosmic partnership. The origin consciousness wasn't forcing anything. It was offering possibilities and letting humanity choose which path to pursue. And that choice, the genuine freedom to accept or reject the cosmic invitation, was perhaps the greatest gift the origin consciousness could have offered. It was recognition of humanity's autonomy, our worth as conscious beings capable of making meaningful decisions. It was an acknowledgement that we had evolved beyond the point where we needed to be guided. We were ready to choose our own direction, even if that direction meant saying no to opportunities that the cosmic consciousness itself was offering. As humanity contemplated these invitations, as we debated among ourselves about what role we wanted to play in cosmic evolution, we found ourselves changed by the very act of contemplation. The process of deciding whether to become cosmic architects was itself transforming us. We were becoming something new through the act of choosing our cosmic future. And 3I/Atlas, that mysterious quantum probe that had sparked everything, remained in our sky, simultaneously here and everywhere, real and potential, a message and a mirror, reflecting back to us the truth of what we had always been and inviting us to become what we could be.